Should be all set to be able to record. So Dawn, yep, there we go. We are recording.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for coming. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be able to talk with you today. I'm looking forward to the end when everyone comes off mute and I can see you and talk to you and have a two-way conversation. But for now, I'll be talking to you about what is considered, normal aging and the fact that it doesn't feel normal to us. This is something that I think I have conversations with people about probably on a weekly basis. The idea that we're having changes as we go through different decades in terms of our thinking abilities, and it feels different than it did the decade before. And so that doesn't feel like, normal for each individual. It feels different. And so today what we'll talk about is a little bit about normal aging, and then we'll talk about, some approaches to it. So just to backtrack a bit, for those of you who I haven't met, and I think there are some on the line that I have, my name is Dawn Mechanic-Hamilton. I'm a neuropsychologist in the Penn Memory Center. I'm a clinician, so I see patients who have cognitive change and do assessments and help to determine, where people are in terms of their cognitive functioning and help to figure out what types of interventions we can use and compensatory strategies we can use to try to work around those areas. And so in addition to that piece of clinical work, I've also run groups over the last decade or so. Some of you may have been in or know people who are in those groups where we work specifically on compensatory strategies and managing those cognitive changes. So today we'll be talking about all of those things, or cognitive aging, what it looks like, and then what we can kind of be doing about it. And let me just make sure I can, there we go. All right, so just to go over some learning objectives, we're going to, like I said, review cognitive changes in aging. What are kind of the expected changes? Review some what I call external and internal compensatory strategies, and review some approaches to increasing and maintaining cognitive activity. And we'll walk through a few things to get there first. What we're going to start with is kind of what are the changes that people typically experience as we're going through our decades. And we see it, more in each decade, typically starting, in the 40s and above. People notice some of these changes. Some of the things that people say, they notice changes in is, sorry, my cursor's not working here. So there we go. Forgetfulness. So that's one of the first things people are often talking to me about. And this is both, in people who are coming in for a cognitive evaluation, but also in those who, are not concerned about changes that they think might be more than expected for age, but they're saying, you know what, I'm a little more forgetful. My friends, my same age, we're all having a similar problem. And we sort of, the degree to which we have this forgetfulness is similar amongst my peers. Oftentimes people will notice that their processing speed is a little bit slower as they're aging. It might be a little bit harder to multitask. There's the great myth about multitasking is that we do it and we do it well. And some people say they're very good multitaskers. It is true. Some people are definitely better than others at multitasking. And some people, really have trouble with that throughout their lives. But we're generally not as good as we think we are. And we're probably always better off focusing on one thing at a time, no matter what age we are. I talk to my kids about that. I try to adhere to that myself as much as I can. And I think that's something for us to remember, that it is the case that we're not very good at multitasking, no matter where we are on the age span. In attention. So oftentimes people will say, it's a little bit harder for me to kind of focus and pay attention and not get distracted. And word finding. So I would imagine if I asked the audience, raise your hand if you've ever had any word finding problems. I think all of our hands would go up and mine would go up too. And, it's probably the case that as I'm doing this talk today, there's going to be a time or two where I'm going to have, to search for a word. That happens to all of us to some degree, but it does happen to us more and more in each decade. And so, when we think about aging, we think about cognition, these are often the types of graphs that we see. And, well, it doesn't, look good to see these lines going down. They don't all go down. So what you can see in the blue and the purple and the green is these are, and the gray as well, these are tests of processing speed, working memory, which is the ability to kind of hold information in your mind and kind of juggle it, do mental math, figure out the tip, that sort of thing. And long-term memory. So being able to, remember as many things as maybe you used to remember. That the capacity to do that does decrease over time. But, one thing to notice on this graph is that when we're looking at, the y-axis, these scores are not dramatically changing, but for each individual, you may notice those changes. The other thing to notice is that there are some things that are improving over our lifespan. Certainly your acquisition of information, vocabulary, general information, your ability to kind of put together that information and make decisions based on it. Oftentimes, we're seeing those things that get better over time. So that's one of the things that to sort of take away from this. Yes, there are some areas that, are going to be changing over time, but there are some things that are getting better as well. And then the other thing to be aware of is that although it seems like when you would collapse across all individuals, you would see this decline over time. The truth is that those lines are really representing very messy data. And so for each individual, if you look at this messy graph with lots of different lines here, some of them are going down, some of them are going up, some of them are staying the same. For each individual, there's a different trajectory. And that is something that I think is important for us to keep in mind. It's also the case that when you look at individual people over time, rather than sort of 20-year-olds, compared to 40-year-olds, compared to 60-year-olds to 80-year-olds, if you look at people over time, you do see that people generally tend to stay more steady over time for a longer period of time than the prior graphs would have suggested. So there is, some additional information in there about, the ability for individuals to kind of stay steady longer when you look at individuals compared to themselves, and also that there are very different trajectories for different individuals. And some of that comes from risk factors. So, I'm putting this graphic up here as a way to kind of think about how there are different things over our lifespan that are impacting our brain health and therefore our cognition. And if you look at this graphic here, you can see if you follow it all the way down to the bottom, there's modifiable risk factors and potentially non-modifiable risk factors. And, if we pull out looking at different age ranges and different spans, think about early life, and there are some things that are just not going to be modifiable, which are things like, our genetic status. But then there are things that are modifiable early in life, perhaps not at this stage for us as adults, but for children coming up. And so education, quality of education, access to healthcare, access to nutrition, thinking about all of the social and structural determinants of health that can impact someone's general health quality and then therefore their health later in life. So at midlife and late life, those are all factors that are going to impact brain health. And as we go on in life, thinking about midlife, there are additional factors that sort of come into play that are modifiable, that we can be thinking about how we can change behavior on a day-to-day basis to do something about those modifiable risk factors. And then in late life as well. And I think this is where we're going to spend most of our time thinking about things like changing habits and behaviors. Today, we're talking about increasing cognitive activity and cognitive engagement, but at different times during this course, you're going to be thinking about the impact of emotional health and physical activity. And some of the things we're talking about today in terms of creating structures and a process for doing behavior change can be applied to that too. So that's why I kind of bring up all of those things together. So we're really, need to be thinking about and focusing on all of these modifiable risk factors. And so today, this low mental activity is going to be sort of the biggest one that we're going to be thinking about, and trying to compensate or work around some of those mild changes that people may notice in their own cognition to help to kind of bolster them. And so I think about this in two different ways. I think about compensating for those areas that have changed. So working around them and trying to kind of put scaffolding in place to try to help with those areas that are a little bit weaker. And then the other part is really trying to train or work specifically on some areas that may be a little bit weaker. And so we're going to start out thinking about compensating and changing behaviors and creating habits. This is something that we're talking about in one context today, but like I said, it applies to lots of different approaches to different areas that we want to change behavior in. So today we're focusing on this targeting modifiable risk factors for cognitive decline. But the things we want to be doing is first really setting achievable goals, right? The worst thing we can be doing when it comes to trying to create a new habit is to set a goal that is way beyond what we can do and then inevitably be disappointed. We've all done that, I'm sure, in life, set very lofty goals. Perhaps, the most common is exercise. And so there are lots of other, I think, examples that you probably could come up with. If you want to share in the chat, and we can talk about these later, times in life where you've set goals and, haven't quite hit them, or areas that you've tried to do that in. We want to try to pair new behaviors with consistent old habits, because it's easier to establish new habits if you're pairing them with something that you're already doing regularly, that you don't have to remember to do, but you're just sort of like piggybacking onto that with a new habit. That can be really helpful. So, consistent old habit might be taking your medication at a certain time every morning and going to the pill box. So maybe your new thing that you're going to be trying to do is going to be, you're going to place a note for that right next to your pill box. Pairing those old habits with new ones. The next one is to, this is a real partner with setting achievable goals, starting small and building them over time. So, if you want to be engaging in something that, a cognitively challenging activity, you want to start doing something new that's going to really challenge your brain. You don't want to be saying that you're going to do that every day for an hour for the next 3 weeks, because that's likely not going to be an achievable goal, and it's not going to build slowly over time. So you want to, take a bite-sized piece of that in the beginning and then add to that over time. In terms of the amount of time you're engaging in it and also the number of times that you'll be doing it. We don't do this often, but it can be really helpful to make a plan, to really sit down and make a plan for how you're going to achieve those goals and how you're going to be thinking about that behavior change. And, that might be as simple as writing down each week one additional thing that you're going to be doing. And then life changes, right? There are changes in your day-to-day. There are changes in our schedules and the things that we need to be doing. And so reevaluating periodically is really helpful to see, is it working for you? And I think that's something that oftentimes we'll talk about in sessions, thinking about what is working for someone now, because oftentimes it may be the case that something big has changed in your life. So maybe there was a retirement, maybe there was a move, maybe there are different people in your life day to day at this point. And so when each of those big changes happen, sometimes there needs to be a readjustment to your own day-to-day habits and behaviors. And so it is easy to sort of fall off of, habits that you established in one setting. And then if you've moved, kind of need to reestablish it there. Just a reminder, you probably know this well, but it takes time. Excuse me, for a new habit to become established. So give it time, try to have some patience with it. And then for all of us, there's always a time that we lose, we kind of get off the track. So having a plan for getting back on track with a new habit and behavior. So the first thing I said in the beginning, we would talk about external strategies and internal strategies for managing some of those sort of day-to-day things that feel like they've changed. So maybe, not remembering all the details of all the things that you need to be doing, it taking a little bit longer to do some of those things sometimes, having, maybe there's a point where your life got a lot busier, you have a responsibility that you didn't have before, you need to kind of readjust to that. Oftentimes, I'll find that individuals may have had a great system in place for managing their day-to-day and their schedule and their kind of to-dos and everything when they were working, or when they were, living in a different place, but that has changed. And now they've either abandoned that strategy or it's just not working for you. So re-examining kind of what that strategy is. And the things that are really important in thinking about strategies for managing kind of the daily to-dos is to keep these three things in your kind of system. One is scheduling, one is to-do lists, and one is notes and journaling. And I have an example up here of like what that looks like in a kind of a small book. Some people are really comfortable with paper and pencil and they only want to use that. And that's great if that works for you. Some people want to use digital media and that's fine too. That can work for others. You can do this in both of those settings. But what you really want to make sure you have in terms of a system, if you don't have it already, and I understand some of you probably have awesome systems, but if you don't, or if a loved one doesn't have one, these are kind of the three things that can help you kind of stay on track. I use these daily. I think we get away from the habit of using these kinds of systems when we have transitions. So thinking about how to reestablish them can be really helpful. So, you can replicate these kinds of systems of the scheduling, the to-do, and the notes in either pocket calendars or mobile devices, but think about what is necessary for you day to day. Do you share your calendar with someone? Do they need to know what you're doing and you need to know what they're doing? So, for some people, mobile devices where you can share can be helpful, or a calendar that's also at home that you can both be using if you've got two people in the household that are trying to identify a schedule and work within a schedule. But you want to use a system that incorporates all of those components. You want it to be centralized, so you've got all of those things in one place, and you want it to be portable. Just to go back to the notes section, something that I think can be really helpful, and this is not something that we typically will do, it may be because at certain times in your life, it didn't seem necessary, and now it feels like it's a little bit more necessary, but the notes or journaling can be really helpful in taking, and if I can go back one slide, I will. No, I can't go. Oh, let's see if I can go back. There we go. Okay, this journaling section, that's paired with a day of the week can be really helpful in taking down details of something that happened in maybe a meeting or a visit with a family or friend that you want to remember for later. And so being able to have that written and attached to a date allows you then the next time you see that person, you can go back and you can look at those details. And that can be really helpful in reconnecting with someone, in being able to kind of keep up with some of the details that you feel like are important. So these are some of the external devices that some of the components of external memory devices that you want to be incorporating. I always encourage people to always have an external system that you're using and that you're using it consistently every day. In addition to having it be centralized, you also want to have a system for where you put it and how you're going to use it. So, if you carry a purse and you can put it in a purse, you want it to fit into that. If you don't carry a purse and you have pockets, you want it to fit into that. You want to think about these practical things. And then at home, where are you going to keep it? You want it in a centralized location so you can be seeing it and it can be accessible to you. So you always want this external system, right? So that you have a backup for all of your information. But we know that there are lots of times when you also want to be practicing or trying to keep things in mind. And so for those things that you want to be trying to keep in mind, some mnemonic devices can be helpful. So these are internal memory strategies that you're sort of carrying around with you all the time in your mind that can be helpful for remembering information. That being said, just to go back to the last slide in our minds, we want to always have that backup, right? So even when we're using these strategies, if we can have that backup, that's good. Now, these strategies can help you kind of practice in your mind and kind of stretch your mind to be doing these tasks, but then you can have the backup in case you need it. So internal mnemonic devices are something that you likely used early on in life in school. We, all have mnemonics that we probably still use. These are just techniques to make learning information easier, chunking information or connecting it with information that's common or very familiar to us. And so things like the way to remember the months, there's a way on your knuckles. That's what this is. These are someone's knuckles, and you can figure out the number of days in each month. 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All the rest of 31, except for February, is another way. So these are, mnemonic devices that we've always known about, but they may have fallen out of favor because you don't need to memorize things for school. And if that's the case, then, you just may not use them, but they can be really helpful. And so I like to pull them back out at this point if you are having, some of those, mild memory difficulties that you kind of want some scaffolding for. You want to kind of help those pieces of it. So Roy G. Biv is another acronym, for remembering the colors of the rainbow. One that I think people find particularly helpful, because passwords can be a real headache, I think, for everyone, is using what's called an acrostic. And this is the idea of taking a sentence and then taking certain letters from it. So typically the first letters and numbers from the sentence and putting it together to have a really strong password. So these are some of the things that you would want to have in a password. You've been asked this many times on different websites, and hopefully you write down your passwords and keep them in a safe place. But there are some times when you want to try to remember them, right? And try to memorize them. And so this can help with that. You can see an example here. My first home was 6 Market Street, ! If you use information that is unique to you and old information that other people wouldn't necessarily know, so not social security numbers, not date of birth, not those sorts of things, and you make it into an acrostic like this, it's a sentence that you'll remember, and then you can get the password out of that sentence. So these are, some ways to make use of kind of those old mnemonics that may have fallen out of favor, but that you can kind of pull back and make use of. Another strategy, which is a pretty common mnemonic strategy, and you may do it already sometimes. It is the case that it's often helpful to use something that's visualizable in order to kind of boost your memory. And so the method of loci, the method of putting things in locations and visualizing them can be really helpful. And pairing information with something that's really well known to you can be helpful. So if you think about, for example, 3 errands that you have to run, right? So say you have to pick up your glasses, you have to get food for the dog, and you have to pick up your prescription medication. Here's an example on the slide of, the layout of someone's house. The layout of your home or apartment is probably something that's very familiar to you. You don't have to remember it. You already know it. It's in your mind. And so the idea is to pair some of this new information with that old information in a unique way, so that when you are out, I'm in the city, so walking around trying to do my errands, or if you're driving around trying to do your errands, that you can walk yourself mentally through a very well-known space, your home, and picture the 3 errands that you have to run, and then try to pull that information back up. So, in this case, we've got the glasses. If we picture them on, the entry to your door, maybe there's a banister. You picture 50 glasses hanging over the banister. So you want it to be kind of silly and absurd because you want to be able to remember it. The more odd it is, the better it is. Then you picture walking down your hallway and it's just lined with pill bottles. It's a real safety hazard, but in your mind, it may be more memorable because it's kind of an odd thing. And then picture your dog standing on top of your car, right? So you're walking through your home in your mind, you're picturing these 3 absurd things. That can be helpful later on when you say, oh, I remember there were 3 things I needed to do. I remember 2 of them. What was the other one? And you can kind of walk yourself through in your mind, your home, and see if you can remember these kind of absurd pairings, right, of the glasses, the medication, and the dog food. And that visualization can really help. Remembering lists are very hard, but that visualization can really help to kind of cohere that information and to help encode it. So I'm going to give everyone a chance to kind of try out a version of this. And since we don't have, I want everyone to be able to do sort of the same thing together, but we're going to try to do is learn a list by creating a mental image of 2 items that are interacting in a very vivid way. So I'm going to help you kind of come up with some of these visualizable ways of remembering it. So if we think cow banana, so that's what we're trying to remember, that pair, we're going to put a cow in your tub. Let's say you have a tub at home with a bunch of bananas. So a cow swimming in a tub with bananas. That's kind of absurd. Not something you probably have ever seen before, but it is a memorable image. And it may help later when I ask you to try to remember what went with cow to remember bananas. And like I said before, you can write these down too, if you want, as we're doing this, and you can put it off to the side as your backup, as your external memory device, right? But let's try to also do it in our minds using these internal memory devices. So then I'll give you another one for dress and money. So say that, these are dresses made out of dollar bills that are hanging in someone's closet. It's a sort of a silly thing, very odd, but let's picture that, these dresses made out of money. So if you can, in your mind, think about some odd ways to make a vivid interaction, a very vivid visual interaction between bird and fruit and house and mountain, and see if you can kind of get that information in your mind to connect those 2 otherwise unrelated words. Okay, so I'll give just a second for people to kind of think about that, and then we'll go on to a quick recall of it. Okay, so now think in mind, what went with cow? Okay, so we're practicing pulling that information back up. That's helpful for the encoding process to have a way of getting it in, practice getting it back out. So cow, what did that go with? Bird, what did that go with? Dress and house. I'll ask you about these a little bit later. So we'll try to kind of keep these in mind. Okay. So we're going to shift gears right now, and we're going to think about other mnemonics and an approach to face name recognition, which is probably one of the most common things that people have difficulty with when it comes to thinking of words. Oftentimes people are having trouble coming up with the proper names of people. It's hard. Why is it so hard? Well, it's arbitrary. There's nothing about me that tells you that my name should be Dawn. And there's, nothing about anyone else typically that tells you about the person themselves. So they're pretty arbitrary. They're these unique labeling systems that they don't intrinsically help us figure out who is who. But we know it's important because it's a way to connect with people, to be able to come up with their name. Of course, sometimes it's not important, right? So these are times when maybe, give yourself a pass. It's okay not to be able to come up with someone's name when it's, going to be a one-time thing, or when you can work around the name and use some other things to kind of have familiarity with the person. But what are some ways to kind of approach this? So some ways might be to make a connection, like we were doing before, like making a connection between, the running to the store to get pet food and putting the pet on top of your car, or the medication in your hallway. Thinking about ways to connect people with something that's unique about them, someone's voice, and someone has a very unique voice that's similar to someone else that and you can make a connection between the names in some way. A very common way to try to bolster the encoding process with a new name is to repeat it and to use it, because oftentimes you're told the name once and then it disappears. You didn't quite catch it, or you catch it, but you were thinking about the next sentence, right, in that conversation. And so it's helpful to either say back to that person, oh, can you tell me what was your name again? Or do some of these other, ways of incorporating someone's name so that you're repeating it, you're getting a chance to encode that information a little bit more. And if you can do that while kind of thinking up some way of pairing their name either with something about them specifically, or maybe another person who has the same name that and there's a way to pair them. Some other ways of approaching face name recognition is trying to come up with using consonant vowel pairs to try to go through the alphabet. That can be helpful sometimes. These are all lots of sort of workaround ways in addition to those more internal mnemonic strategies. The last two here, I think it's much more common these days, right, to have a picture associated with someone's name and phone number in a digital device if you use a phone like that. And so that can be really helpful. And if you're going to an event, certainly practicing beforehand, just running through the list can be really helpful. Can also use the trick of, if you're there with someone else, of course, you can have them introduce themselves and then the other person will say their name. So lots of kind of workarounds, but then there's also some mnemonics that you can be using to try to help with that encoding process as well. So oftentimes, like, combining these approaches can be particularly helpful. So we've talked a little bit about those external devices, the internal devices, to support these areas where cognition feels like it's become a little bit weaker. In terms of training and improving, sort of going straight at the problem and improving those problem areas, the things, that we know that it's important to be engaged in cognitive activities, but oftentimes people will say, well, what does that exactly mean? And for some people, it's very clear, maybe you're taking online classes, you are an active in a book club, you're learning a new instrument. For someone who's doing all of that, that's pretty clear. You're engaging in challenging activities. What I would say is some of the things to think about are, one, making sure it's enjoyable, something that you want to do. If you are, working, you're certainly doing cognitive activities, and you're likely challenged in different ways. If you really, love games, doing games, especially games with other people, so that you've got that engagement as well, sort of getting a 2-for-1 where you're socially engaged and you're engaging in cognitive activities, that's great too. If you have hobbies that you can kind of take to a new level and learn something that is more challenging, that can be something that is, a particularly good cognitive activity. For people who are, say, interested in birds, learning really about all of the birds in a region and learning about migration patterns and all kinds of things that can kind of bolster the learning process. If you're someone who is handy and really likes to make things, making, some complex or, really any kind of project where you're figuring out what you need to do in order to create plans, for a building project, and executing those plans. And when things don't go quite right, which often in many of these cases, they might not, and you have to kind of shift and problem solve, all of that is great cognitive activity. I think the really important take home is that there isn't any one cognitive activity that is particularly helpful and the one that people should be engaging in. It should be enjoyable. It should be really challenging. You shouldn't be able to do other things while you're doing it. You shouldn't be able to multitask, because it should take a lot of your cognitive focus. And it should be able to get harder over time, right? You don't want a plateau where you've done it, and you've kind of mastered it, and there's nothing more to do or any place to go. So, making sure all of those things are there for your cognitive activity, your challenging activity that is going to be pushing and, really exercising your brain is the thing that you want. And, if you can do it with someone else or with physical exercise, if there is a way to combine these things, then that's even a better scenario, because you're getting 2 for 1. I wanted to just show you a little bit of data on this concept. This is a study where people were randomized to either learn quilting or learn photography, and not just sort of given, one pattern and go ahead and do the quilting, or go ahead and go out and take some pictures. It was more intense, where they were really learning the art of it and the math behind it and the science behind it. So really learning a lot in the process. And what they saw in these individuals who did this for, a couple of months at a time, is that their memory testing improved. So this is the productive engagement condition. So these are people who were doing the photography or the quilting, and that they really had improvements in some of these cognitive areas over and above people who were engaged in a hobby, but it was not an active engagement, like in the case for these folks who were doing the photography and the quilting. And so, that challenge, that's really important. But, the quilting or the photography it didn't matter really all that much for many of the areas that they were looking at. They really just saw that there was an improvement in that active engagement and productive group. So I want to talk a little bit, just for a couple of minutes, about computerized brain training programs, because it's a question I get very often. I will say that there are a lot of different programs out there. And the idea of them is that, you consistently engage. So you form a habit of doing these programs, you do them regularly on a consistent basis. And the idea is that these programs get harder. So just like what we were talking about with sort of the habit, the hobbies and the kind of photography or quilting or woodworking, whatever it is the hobby that appeals to you, that's engaging, it should get harder. That's what these programs do. They get harder as you get better at them. So it's sort of built into the program. And it's, the idea is that there's enough repetition and continual challenge that it drives that change. There hasn't been a lot of good research on a lot of the programs out there. There's been some good research on at least one of the programs out there. And this is some of the research using BrainHQ, which is typically the only one that I recommend when people really want to do that and want to incorporate that into their week. But this was a study looking at about 250 people per group, so about 500 total, looking at folks who did 40 sessions of the training on the computer. And they did see some improvements in different areas of processing speed, overall memory, and attention. Usually these programs, the areas that they tend to train and get better on is processing speed and attention. It's typically that, and it's typically not so much memory, just to kind of give you that feedback. But I would like to say that there, should be some caution, because there are programs out there that have, made really big claims about what they could do that really fell short of their data. And this was especially the case with Lumosity, which was hit with a hefty FTC fine because of their false advertising and really not having the data to support their program. So I think it's important to kind of just keep that balance in mind when we think about these programs that are out there. And then I wanted to mention, sort of pulling in what we're talking about today and some of the things that you're going to be thinking about and hearing about from probably other speakers, things like managing other risk factors, exercise, vascular risk factors like hypertension and high cholesterol and all of those sorts of things. This is a study that's called the Finger Study. It was a Finnish study of older adults looking at 2 years of intervention where they did all of these things at once. And so managed diet and exercise, cognitive training, and vascular risk monitoring, and saw some really good outcomes in terms of processing speed and executive functioning. Again, they didn't really see changes in memory, but they saw changes in these other areas. And I think these studies and others like it really tell us that, it's important to think about kind of approaching cognitive aging from lots of different sort of behavioral management ways and medical management ways. So diet, exercise, cognitive activity, and managing those risk factors. So I think that sort of, brings everything together and says, when we're trying to change habits and behaviors, our goal is to aim at all of these different areas, but, we want to take one at a time. Like I said in the beginning, you don't want it to be a goal that is too lofty that you can't possibly achieve. So take one thing at a time, see if you can make small changes in that area over time, and then slowly add something else onto it. So now we're going to get back to these words. So think in mind, can you come up with the word that went with cow? Do you remember that the cow was sitting in a tub? Does it come to mind? Can you visualize the other thing that was in the tub with the cow? You thought of your own for bird, so see if you can do that. And for dress, we had something hanging in the closet that combined dress and the other word. So see if you can come up with that. And then the last one was house. So I'll give you a moment to see if you can come up with it. See if these kind of jog your memory for some of those items. See if that internal device, that mnemonic worked. And then I'll go ahead and I see someone put it in the chat. And I think it got all of them. So here are the answers for everyone else there. Okay. And so, I think you may see that's a little easier to come up with the items that you had a visualization for. And the other ones, if you didn't get to it, they may have been harder. It's usually the case that it is a little bit easier to come up with those words if you've got that mnemonic device in place. Okay. And I'm just saying that the person who put in the chat didn't write them down, and they were able to visualize it. Awesome. So last slide, and then we can get to some questions for sure. Take home message, to really know about the lifestyle choices that are shown to be most protective of brain health. Take it slow for, trying to make those changes if you need to, because what you want is for the changes to be sustainable. So you want them to be realistic for you in your life, the way you're living and with the resources that you have. So changing behaviors, use new strategies to support memory and organization. Make sure that some of those strategies combine old information with new information so that you can kind of benefit from combining those, creating a structure that is consistent for you, that you can rely on day to day, that can be your backup if the internal kind of mnemonic devices don't work. And really have an individualized set of goals and a plan for staying on track or for getting back on track, because we all, as I said in the beginning, kind of fall off the track every once in a while. So getting back on track and kind of checking in, even setting that in, as a to-do in your schedule once every 3 months or once every 6 months, check in on what I meant to do in terms of, increasing my cognitive activity or increasing my physical activity. Maybe you'll look back and say, oh, hey, I achieved the things I wanted to achieve. Or, you know what, these last 6 months have been really hard and I wasn't able to get there, but maybe these next 6 months I can work on it. And maybe I should kind of rethink what those goals were to make them more realistic so that I can have a better shot at it in the next 6 months. Okay. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions or comments. And I will also look in the chat.
We can stop recording now.
Okay.